The massive crystal spires of Zephyros Prime stretched toward the purple sky like frozen lightning. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the viewing window of the human transport ship and watched the alien capital city grow larger as they descended. The buildings seemed to pulse with their own inner light, and Jake knew this was no trick of technology but the natural way. Zephyrian structures worked with their homeworld's energy fields. First time seeing their architecture up close, Sir Lieutenant, Amy Shen said as she joined him at the window. Her voice carried the same mixture of wonder and nervousness that Jake felt in his own chest. The Galactic Peace Summit happened only once every 10 years, and this was the first time humans had been invited to attend as full participants rather than mere observers. Jake nodded and checked his ceremonial power armor one more time. The sleek black and silver plates covered him from head to toe and hummed quietly with contained energy. Every human diplomat wore similar armor to these formal events. It had become their signature look across the galaxy, and other species expected to see humans in their mechanical suits. The armor made them look taller and broader than they really were, and Jake knew that was part of the point. Remember our briefing? Jake said to Amy and the rest of his team. We are here to prove that Earth deserves a permanent seat on the Galactic Council. Every word we speak and every action we take will be watched and judged. The other species still see us as newcomers, who got lucky with faster-than-light travel. The transport ship settled onto a landing pad made of the same crystal material as the rest of the city. Jake could feel the vibrations through his boots as the alien technology interfaced with their human ship systems. Everything here was designed to remind visitors that they were in Zephyrian space and subject to Zephyrian power as the airlock. Open Jake got his first breath of alien air. It tasted metallic and slightly sweet and carried strange scents that his human nose could not quite identify. The gravity was lighter than Earth normal, and Jake had to adjust his walking to avoid appearing clumsy. His armor compensated automatically, but he knew some of the watching aliens would notice even small missteps. A delegation of Zephyrian officials waited to greet them. Their crystalline skin caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns, and their large eyes held an intelligence that felt ancient and patient. They wore flowing robes that seemed to move independently of any wind, and Jake could feel the subtle pressure of their telepathic abilities pressing against the edges of his mind. Welcome to Zephyros Prime, Captain Morrison, the lead official said, in perfect English. I am Chancellor Vex, and I will be your guide during the summit. Please follow me to the Great Assembly Hall where the other delegations are gathering. Jake thanked the Chancellor and fell into step behind him. His human team formed up around him in a protective formation that looked casual but would allow them to respond quickly to any threat. Old habits from military service died hard, and Jake knew the aliens noticed everything about human behavior. The walk through the crystal corridors gave Jake his first look at the other species attending the summit. Tall reptilian beings from the Saurian Empire moved in groups and spoke in hissing whispers. The insectoid hive queens floated in gravity bubbles surrounded by their smaller drone attendants. Graceful energy beings from the ethereal collective drifted through the halls like living aurora displays. Each species had their own guards and attendants, and Jake noticed how they all moved with the confidence of those who belonged. Humans were still the newest members of this galactic community, and everyone knew it. Jake had read the files on each major species, but seeing them in person drove home just how different and ancient most of them were compared to humanity. Your armor is quite impressive, Captain, Chancellor Vex said as they walked. I understand. It enhances your natural abilities considerably. It does, Jake replied carefully. He knew this was more than casual conversation. Every word would be analyzed later. Human engineering focuses on practical applications, indeed. Many species wonder how humans advance so quickly from planetary civilization to galactic power in just 50 years. Your technology seems to leap forward at an unprecedented rate. Jake heard the question behind the comment but chose not to rise to the bait. Let the aliens wonder about human development. Sometimes mystery was more valuable than explanation. The Great Assembly Hall opened before them like a cathedral made of living light. The ceiling stretched up beyond sight and the walls curved in ways that hurt to look at directly. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species filled the space, and Jake felt very small despite his armor. The human delegation, announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Conversations stopped and hundreds of alien eyes turned toward Jake and his team. Some looks were curious. Others were dismissive. A few were openly hostile. Jake kept his expression neutral as Chancellor Vex led them to their assigned section. The seating arrangement told its own story about galactic politics. The oldest and most powerful species sat closest to the central speaking platform. Humans were placed in the middle sections with other mid-tier civilizations. As Jake took his seat, he noticed a commotion near the front of the hall. A young Zephyrian female was holding court among a group of younger aliens from various species. Her crystalline skin was more brilliant than the others, and she wore a crown of living energy that marked her as royalty. This had to be Princess Lirelei, who Jake had read about in the briefing files. The princess was speaking loudly enough for her voice to carry, and Jake caught fragments of her words. She was telling some kind of story that involved mocking human military tactics, and the other young aliens were laughing appreciatively. Jake felt Amy tense beside him, but he touched her arm in warning. "Let it go," he whispered. "We are here to observe and learn." But Princess Lirelei was not content to keep her performance quiet. Her voice grew louder and her gestures more dramatic, as she described what she called the amusing way humans hide inside their metal shells like frightened insects. Jake felt the attention of the hall shifting toward the human section as other delegates began to listen to the princess. Her words were clearly meant to be heard by everyone, including the humans themselves. This was a deliberate provocation designed to test how the newest galactic power would respond to insult. "Perhaps," the princess said with a smile that showed too many sharp teeth, "we should ask our human guests to show us what they look like without their protective shells. I'm curious to see if there is anything underneath all that metal and circuitry." The hall fell silent as everyone waited to see how Jake would respond. This was exactly the kind of diplomatic trap he had been warned about. React too strongly and humans would look like warmongers. Show weakness and they would lose respect that had taken decades to build. Jake stood slowly and felt his armor adjust to support the movement. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the vast space without any need for amplification. "Princess Lirelei," he said with a slight bow of respect, "humans appreciate curiosity about our customs. We look forward to productive discussions during the summit." It was a perfect diplomatic non-answer that acknowledged her words without engaging with the insult. Jake sat back down and the hall gradually returned to its normal buzz of conversation. But he could see Princess Lirelei watching him with new interest, and Jake knew this was only the beginning. The second day of the summit brought military demonstrations that were meant to showcase each species' capabilities without actual combat. Jake stood with his delegation on the observation deck overlooking the testing grounds where various alien technologies were being displayed. The morning had already seen impressive shows of force from the Saurian Empire plasma cannons and the ethereal collective energy manipulation abilities. "Quite a display," Amy Chun commented as they watched a hive queen direct her drones through complex aerial maneuvers. The insectoid creatures moved as one mind controlling hundreds of bodies simultaneously. "Makes you wonder what they really think of human tactics." Jake nodded, but kept his attention on Princess Lirelei, who was moving through the crowd of observers like a predator looking for prey. She had spent the morning making pointed comments about various species' strengths and weaknesses, and Jake suspected the human delegation was building up to be her main target. The princess wore a different crown today, one made of what looked like crystallized starlight, and her ceremonial robes shifted color with her movements. Jake had learned from the briefing files that she was considered brilliant by Zephyrian standards, but also reckless and prone to dramatic gestures. Her father, the Emperor, tolerated her behavior because she was his only heir, but many in the Zephyrian court worried about her judgment. "Captain Morrison," Princess Lirelei called out in her clear, carrying voice. "How exciting to see you here. I was just explaining to my friends how human military doctrine relies so heavily on mechanical enhancement." Jake turned to face her, knowing that once again all eyes in the area were focusing on their interaction. The princess had positioned herself where her voice would carry to the maximum number of observers, and Jake realized this had been planned in advance. Human doctrine emphasizes practical effectiveness. Princess Jake replied evenly. We use the tools that work best for each situation. Tools, yes, the princess said with a laugh that sounded like crystal chimes in a winter wind. But what happens when those tools fail, Captain? What happens when a human is separated from his armor and weapons? Does anything remain? The question hung in the air, and Jake felt the weight of expectation from every alien in earshot. This was more than casual conversation. The princess was building toward something, and Jake could see the anticipation in her expression. I propose a small demonstration, Princess Lirley continued before Jake could answer. A contest of skill and strength between myself and our honored human guest. But to make it fair, he should remove that mechanical enhancement first. Let us see what human capability looks like without technological assistance. The suggestion sent a ripple of excitement through the watching aliens. Jake could hear whispered conversations in a dozen different languages as the word spread quickly through the observation deck. This was exactly the kind of dramatic moment that would be remembered and discussed for years. Amy stepped closer to Jake and spoke quietly. Sir, this could be a trap. We do not know what her real capabilities are, and losing here could damage Earth reputation badly. Jake considered his options while keeping his expression neutral. Refusing the challenge would look weak, but accepting it carried obvious risks. The princess was clearly confident in her abilities, and Jake had no idea what Zephyrian royal training involved. For all he knew, she could tear him apart with her bare hands. Afraid, Captain? Princess Lirley asked sweetly. I understand if humans feel unsafe without their protective shells. Perhaps your species simply evolved to be dependent on artificial enhancement. The insult was delivered with a smile, but its meaning was clear to everyone listening. Jake felt anger flare in his chest, but forced it down. Losing his temper would be exactly what the princess wanted. The human delegation appreciates your interest in our capabilities, Princess, Jake said formally. However, we are here for diplomatic purposes, not entertainment. Oh, but this would be educational, the princess replied quickly. So many species are curious about what humans are really like beneath all that technology. Consider it a cultural exchange. Jake looked around at the watching faces and saw that the princess had backed him into a corner. Refusing again would make humans look cowardly and secretive. The other species were already whispering among themselves about human dependence on armor and weapons. Very well, Princess, Jake said finally. If you insist on a demonstration. The crowd pressed closer as Jake began to unseal his armor. The ceremonial power suit was designed to be removed quickly if necessary, and Jake had practiced the procedure hundreds of times, but doing it here, in front of hostile alien observers, felt different. The chest plate came away first, revealing the simple black uniform underneath. Jake handed each piece to Amy, who accepted them with obvious reluctance. The arm guards followed, then the leg protection, and finally the helmet that had hidden his face from direct view. As more of Jake became visible, the alien crowd grew quieter. Whatever they had expected to see was apparently not what stood before them now. Jake was tall even without the armor boost, and his movements were fluid and controlled. Years of military training showed in the way he held himself and the confidence in his stance. Princess Lirley watched the process with growing uncertainty. The weak, dependent creature she had expected to reveal was nowhere to be seen. Instead, Jake looked more dangerous without his armor, not less. There was something in his posture and the way his eyes assessed his surroundings that suggested a predator comfortable in his own skin. Well, Princess, Jake said quietly when the last piece of armor was removed. You wanted to see what a human looks like. Here I am. The princess hesitated for the first time since Jake had known her. She had clearly expected something different and now found herself facing an opponent who seemed perfectly at ease without his technological advantages. The crowd was silent, waiting to see what would happen next. Jake took a step toward the princess, and she actually stepped back involuntarily. The movement was small, but every observer saw it, and Jake knew the psychological impact was significant. He had done nothing threatening, but his mere presence without armor seemed to unsettle her. "I think perhaps this demonstration has served its purpose," Jake said calmly. "You wanted to know what humans are like beneath our tools. Now, without another word, Jake turned and walked away from the princess and the crowd. His team fell in behind him, and Jake could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching his every step. Amy carried his armor, but Jake did not look back or show any hurry to put it back on. The silence behind him stretched out until someone in the crowd began to whisper. Then others joined in, and soon the observation deck buzzed with excited conversation in a dozen languages. Jake had done something completely unexpected, and the aliens were struggling to understand what they had witnessed. "Sir," Amy said quietly as they walked. "That was either brilliant or completely insane." Jake smiled slightly but kept walking. He had made his point without fighting or backing down. Sometimes the most powerful response was the one nobody expected. Princess Lirale watched him go with an expression of confusion and growing respect. She had planned to humiliate the human captain and instead found herself wondering what else she had misunderstood about his species. The demonstration was over, but Jake knew the real consequences. "We're just beginning." Jake Morrison walked through the crystal corridors of the Zephyrian Palace without his armor and felt completely at ease. The weight he had carried for so long was gone, but he did not feel vulnerable or exposed. Instead, he felt more himself than he had in years. Behind him, he could hear the excited whispers of aliens who had witnessed something they could not quite understand. Amy Chun hurried to keep pace with him while carrying his armor components. "So the other delegations are staring," she said quietly. "Word is spreading fast about what happened back there." Jake nodded but did not slow his stride. He had made a choice in that moment when Princess Lirale challenged him, and now he had to follow through completely. Half measures would undermine everything he was trying to accomplish. "Let them stare," Jake replied. "Let them wonder." They reached the human quarters, and Jake finally stopped walking. His team gathered around him with expressions ranging from admiration to concern. Lieutenant Ben Carter spoke for all of them when he asked, "Sir, what exactly are we doing here?" Jake looked at each of his people and saw good soldiers who had followed him into uncertainty because they trusted his judgment. They deserved an explanation. Even if he was not entirely sure himself what the full consequences would be, "We are showing them who we really are," Jake said simply. "For 50 years humanity has worn armor and carried weapons into every meeting with alien species. We became known for our technology and our military strength, but somewhere along the way they started thinking the tools were what made us dangerous." Amy set his armor down carefully, and Jake made no move to put it back on. The simple black uniform he wore underneath made him look smaller than before, but somehow more real. "More present. Princess Lirale wanted to embarrass us," Jake continued. "She thought removing my armor would reveal weakness. Instead, it revealed something else entirely." "What, sir?" Ben asked. "That we do not need the armor to be what we are." Jake walked to the window and looked out over the alien city. In the distance, he could see other delegations moving through the crystal streets, and he knew they were talking about the human captain who had walked away from a challenge without fighting or backing down. "The other species have been making assumptions about us," Jake said. "They think our rapid advancement came from desperation or luck. They think we rely on technology because we are weak without it. Today I showed them they were wrong." A soft chime announced a visitor at their door, and Amy moved to answer it. Chancellor Vex stood outside with an expression that might have been curiosity on his crystalline features. "Captain Morrison," the Chancellor said. "Might I have a word?" Jake nodded and stepped outside to speak privately with the Zephyrian official. The corridor was empty, but Jake knew their conversation would be monitored and analyzed by every intelligence service at the summit. "That was an interesting display," Captain Chancellor Vex said carefully. "Princess Lirale is rather shaken by your response. I hope she learned something useful." Jake replied, "Indeed." "We all did." The Chancellor paused, and Jake sensed he was choosing his words carefully. "In my years of diplomatic service, I have seen many species attempt to demonstrate their strength through combat or display. Your approach was rather different." Jake waited for the Chancellor to continue. He had learned that silence often revealed more than questions. Walking away from a challenge is typically seen as weakness in galactic politics, Chancellor Vex said. But your departure felt more like a demonstration of strength. It has caused quite a stir among the other delegations. Good, Jake said simply. May I ask what you hope to accomplish, Captain? Your behavior is being analyzed by every species present, and the conclusions vary widely. Jake considered how much to reveal. The Chancellor seemed genuinely curious rather than hostile, but Jake knew anything he said would be reported back to the Zephyrian Emperor. Chancellor, Jake said finally, how long did it take your people to develop faster than light travel? Approximately 2,000 years from the first theoretical proposals to successful implementation, and how long for the Saurian Empire? Similar time frame. Most species require extensive technological development over many centuries. Humans achieved it in less than 100 years, Jake said. From the first airplane to interstellar travel in a single century. That kind of advancement does not come from desperation or luck, Chancellor. Then what does it come from? Jake smiled, and for a moment the Chancellor saw something in the human expression that made him step back involuntarily. It comes from what we are, Jake said quietly. The armor and weapons are tools, Chancellor. Very good tools that we built and we control. But they are not what makes us dangerous. The Chancellor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of uncertainty that Jake had not heard before. Captain Morrison, I am beginning to think we may have misunderstood your species rather badly. Yes, Jake agreed. You have. Jake turned to go back to his quarters, but the Chancellor stopped him with another question. What should we expect from humanity in the future? Captain Jake looked back at the alien diplomat and considered all the ways he could answer that question. Finally, he chose the simplest truth: expect us to continue being what we have always been, Chancellor. The only difference is now you are starting to see it. Jake returned to his quarters and found his team waiting with update reports. From Earth, the news of his actions at the summit had already reached human space, and the reactions were mixed. Some praised his boldness, while others worried about diplomatic consequences. Sir, Amy said, Admiral Parker wants to know if you need backup or replacement armor. Jake almost laughed at that. The Admiral was thinking like a military officer when this was about something much more fundamental than equipment. Tell the Admiral that everything is proceeding according to plan, Jake said. Is it, sir? Ben asked. Do we have a plan? Jake looked at his armor sitting unused in the corner, and then at his team of capable humans who had followed him across the galaxy to represent their species. The plan, Ben, is to stop pretending to be something we are not. Jake sighed. We are not a species that needs armor to be dangerous. We are a species that chooses to wear armor because we can build it better than anyone else, and if the aliens do not understand the difference, sir, then we will teach them, Jake said simply. Starting tomorrow, outside their window, the alien city pulsed with light, and Jake knew that across those crystal spires beings from dozens of worlds were trying to understand what they had witnessed today. Some would figure it out quickly. Others would need more time, but they would all learn eventually that humanity was not what they had thought. The armor had never been a crutch. It had been a choice. And humans were always most dangerous when they were making their own choices. News of Captain Jake Morrison's actions spread through the summit like ripples in a pond. By the third day, every delegation had heard about the human who removed his armor and walked away from a challenge. The story grew with each telling, and Jake found himself the subject of intense scrutiny from species who had previously ignored the human presence. Ambassador Krex of the Saurian Empire was the first to request a private meeting. The reptilian diplomat stood nearly 8 feet tall, and his scaled hide bore the scars of ancient battles. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a predator who had never known defeat. Captain Morrison, Ambassador Krex said as they met in a neutral conference room. Your actions yesterday have caused considerable discussion among my people. Jake sat across from the massive alien without his armor and noted how the ambassador's eyes tracked his every movement. I hope the discussion has been productive, Ambassador. Enlightening would be a better word, Krex replied. We Saurians pride ourselves on understanding military capabilities. Your species has always been classified as technologically dependent. Yesterday, you suggested that classification might be incorrect. Jake waited for the ambassador to continue. The Saurian Empire controlled a significant portion of galactic space, and their opinion of humanity would influence many smaller species. My military advisors have been reviewing human conflict records, Ambassador Krex said. They found something interesting. In every recorded battle where human equipment failed, your soldiers continued fighting effectively. This suggests capabilities we had not previously considered. What kind of capabilities, Ambassador? Adaptability, resilience, the ability to function without technological support. Krex leaned forward and his predator instincts were clearly engaged. Tell me, Captain Morrison, are humans naturally dangerous, or do they simply build good weapons? Jake smiled and saw how the expression made the ambassador tense slightly. What do you think, Ambassador? I think we may have been asking the wrong questions about your species. The meeting with Ambassador Krex was followed by similar requests from other major powers. The Ethereal Collective sent a probe that attempted to read Jake's thoughts directly, but found only calm confidence where they expected to find technological dependence. The Hive Queens dispatched scouts to observe human behavior patterns and returned with reports that confused their analyst princess. Lirale avoided Jake for 2 days, but her advisors were less patient. Senior Chancellor Thyax approached Jake during the evening meal with barely concealed concern. Captain, the elderly Zephyrian said, the prince's behavior has become erratic since your encounter. She spends hours reviewing human military records and asking questions about your technological development. Jake looked across the dining hall where Princess Lirale sat with her usual group of young nobles. She was speaking quietly and her companions were listening with unusual attention. What kind of questions, Chancellor? She wants to know why humans developed armor if they did not need it for survival. She asks about human colony worlds and how your people adapt to different environments. Most disturbing, she has requested access to classified intelligence reports about human capabilities. Jake raised an eyebrow at that. Classified reports, the kind that detail how human soldiers perform when separated from their equipment, Chancellor Thyax said grimly. The kind that describe human survival rates in hostile environments. The kind that suggest your species might be more formidable than our public assessments indicate. Jake understood now why the Chancellor looked worried. Princess Lirale was beginning to see through the assumptions her people had made about humanity, and the implications were unsettling for those who preferred humans to remain underestimated. Chancellor, Jake said carefully, what would happen if those reports became public knowledge? It would change everything, Captain. Military alliances, trade agreements. The entire balance of galactic power is based on current assessments of each species' capabilities. If humanity is significantly stronger than believed, the Chancellor did not finish the thought, but Jake understood. Fear often drove policy decisions in galactic politics, and fear of human potential could lead to preemptive action by nervous neighbors. Perhaps, Jake suggested, it would be better for everyone if the truth came out gradually. Through understanding rather than revelation, Chancellor Thyax studied Jake's face and seemed to find something reassuring there. You may be right, Captain. But the princess is not known for gradual approaches to anything as if summoned by their conversation. Princess Lirale rose from her table and walked directly toward them. Her usual entourage followed at a distance, but she came alone to stand before Jake. Captain Morrison, she said formally. I owe you an apology. The dining hall grew quiet as other delegates noticed the exchange. Jake stood politely and waited for her to continue. I made assumptions about your people based on incomplete information, the princess said. I thought your reliance on technology indicated weakness. I now understand I was wrong. What changed your mind, princess? Research, Captain. Lots of research. She glanced at Chancellor Thyax, who nodded slightly. Did you know that humans have successfully colonized worlds that other species cannot even visit? Planets with gravity that would crush most beings. Atmospheres that are toxic to anyone without environmental suits. Radiation levels that should be fatal. Jake knew these facts, but hearing them recited by an alien noble gave them different weight. Yet humans adapt and thrive, Princess Lirale continued. Your people do not just survive in these places. You build cities, you raise families, you create art and literature, all while other species require massive technological intervention. Just to exist temporarily in such environments, humans are adaptable princes. No, Captain, she said firmly. Humans are extraordinary, and I was too ignorant to see it. The princess turned to address the entire dining hall, and her voice carried clearly through the space. I want everyone here to know that I was wrong about humanity, she announced. I mocked their technology and suggested they were weak without it. But technology does not make humans strong. Humans make technology strong. The silence that followed was profound. Princess Lirelei had just publicly reversed her position on human capabilities in front of every major species in the galaxy. The political implications would ripple outward for years. Jake inclined his head respectfully to the princess. Thank you for your honesty, princess. It takes courage to admit when we have been wrong. It takes wisdom to know when we have been foolish, Captain, she replied. I hope I am becoming wiser. As the princess returned to her table, Jake noticed how the conversations around the hall had changed. Delegates who had been discussing trade agreements and territorial disputes were now focused on humanity and what the prince's revelation might mean. Chancellor Thyax leaned close to Jake and spoke quietly. Captain, I believe you have accomplished something remarkable here. You have changed how the galaxy sees your species without firing a shot or making a threat. Jake nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. The hard part comes next, Chancellor. What? Do you mean now that they know what we are? Jake said. We have to prove we can be trusted with it? The ripple effect was spreading beyond the summit now. Jake could see it in the way alien delegations spoke to each other and in the urgent messages being sent to homeworlds across the galaxy. Humanity had been redefined in the span of 3 days, and everyone was scrambling to understand what that meant for the future, but Jake knew this was only the beginning. Real change would take time and patience and the kind of steady demonstration that built trust rather than fear. He had removed his armor to make a point, but now he had to prove that humanity deserved the respect that Revelation had earned. The final day of the summit arrived with a changed atmosphere that everyone could feel. Jake Morrison walked into the great assembly hall without his armor and noticed how the conversation stopped differently now. Where before there had been dismissive glances or curious stares, now there was something approaching respect in the alien eyes that followed his movement. Princess Lirelei waited near the human delegation seating area. She had requested this private conversation before the closing ceremonies began, and Jake could see the nervousness in her crystalline features. The confident young royal who had mocked humans just days ago was gone, and in her place stood someone who looked genuinely uncertain. Captain Morrison, she said quietly as he approached. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Jake nodded and gestured for her to continue. Around them the hall filled with delegates from across the galaxy, but their conversation felt separate from the larger gathering. I have spent 3 days trying to understand what happened when you removed your armor, Princess Lirelei said. I keep coming back to the same question, and I hope you will answer it honestly. What question, Princess? If your people are capable of such remarkable things without technology, why do you use it so extensively? Why build armor and weapons and ships if you do not need them to be effective? Jake had expected this question and had thought carefully about how to answer it. The princess was asking about something fundamental to human nature, and the response would shape how she understood his entire species. Princess, Jake said, may I ask you something first? Why do Zephyrians build crystal cities when you could live in caves? Why create art when survival does not require beauty? Why explore space when your homeworld provides everything you need? The princess considered this for a moment. Because we can, she said slowly. Because having the ability to create something beautiful or complex gives meaning to existence. Exactly, Jake smiled and saw understanding begin to dawn in her large eyes. Humans do not build technology because we are weak, Princess. We build it because we can. Every tool we create is not a replacement for human capability, but an extension of it. I do not understand the difference. Jake looked around the great hall and saw dozens of species interacting with each other through various forms of technology, translation devices, gravity manipulators, Environmental suits. All were tools that enabled beings to function beyond their natural limitations. Other species developed technology to overcome their weaknesses, Jake explained. They build environmental suits because they cannot survive in alien atmospheres. They create weapons because they are not naturally dangerous. They design ships because they cannot travel between stars on their own. Princess Lirelei followed his gaze, and Jake could see her beginning to understand. Humans are different, Jake continued. We developed environmental suits not because we cannot survive in hostile places, but because we can survive better with them. We created weapons not because we are harmless, but because we can be more effective when properly equipped. We built starships not because we cannot explore, but because we can explore farther and faster with the right tools. You amplify existing strengths rather than compensating for weaknesses. Yes, Jake said simply. That is the fundamental difference, Princess. Our technology makes us more human, not less human. The princess was quiet for a long moment as she processed this revelation. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of awe that Jake had not heard before. Your species does not depend on technology, she said. You master it. We try to, Jake agreed. Sometimes we succeed better than others. Captain, I must ask you something else, and I hope you will not take offense. Jake waited. Are humans dangerous? The question hung between them, and Jake knew his answer would influence how Princess Lirelei, and through her the entire Zephyrian Empire, viewed humanity for generations to come. Yes, Princess, Jake said honestly. Humans are very dangerous, but we are not indiscriminately dangerous. We choose when and how to apply our capabilities based on circumstances and need. How dangerous? Jake considered how much truth the princess was ready to hear. Finally, he decided that honesty served better than diplomacy. Dangerous enough that no other species should ever want to find out the full extent of our capabilities, Jake said quietly. But controlled enough that our allies need never fear us. Princess. Lirelei nodded slowly, and Jake could see her filing away this information for future reference. Thank you for your honesty, Captain, she said. I believe I understand now why you walked away from my challenge. You were not afraid of losing. You were afraid of what winning might reveal. Jake neither confirmed nor denied this, but his slight smile told the princess everything she needed to know. The closing ceremonies began with speeches from the senior delegates of each major power. Jake listened as Ambassador Krex of the Saurian Empire announced new military cooperation agreements with humanity. The Ethereal Collective proposed joint exploration missions. Even the Hive Queens offered to share certain technologies in exchange for human engineering expertise. When Princess Lirelei took the podium, her speech was brief but significant. The Zephyrian Empire formally recognizes humanity as a major galactic power, she announced. We propose that Earth be granted a permanent seat on the Galactic Security Council and full voting rights in all future assemblies. The hall erupted in discussion as delegates realized what this meant. The Zephyrian proposal would need to be ratified by other major powers, but their support carried enormous weight in galactic politics. Jake felt Amy Chen touch his arm and looked down to see her holding his armor. Sir, she said quietly, perhaps you should put this back on for the final ceremony. Jake looked at the sleek black and silver plates that had defined human appearance in galactic politics for 50 years. Then he looked around the hall at aliens who were seeing humanity clearly. For the first time, no, he said finally. I think I will leave it off for now. Amy smiled and said,